Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Welln'ish. Today we have a very special guest, Kelly Faubert. If you're an animal lover or a mom, you won't want to miss this episode. Kelly is a vet working at an emergency hospital in Montreal. On top of that, she's a mom of 3 boys and at one time was a mom of 1 cat, 2 adult dogs, and 6 puppies. You may have even caught her on CTV News this fall. Don't worry, we'll get into that a little bit later. While having a very scientific mind, Kelly has also felt pulled into the direction of the natural and alternative world. She delivered all 3 of her boys naturally with a midwife. She has also started a dog treat, food, and supplement line, hoping to use quality ingredients to improve the health of our best friends. Needless to say, she's one of the coolest people I know and someone I really look up to, and I'm very excited to have her here. So welcome, Kelly.
Thanks for having me.
So some people are probably confused, like why I'm talking about you as a vet and also you having delivered your babies naturally. So I was just curious if you remembered our first conversation that we had at the gym a while ago.
So we were just
like 7 years ago.
So I can assume what we talked about, to be honest, because I've had that conversation many times before. And I think it's just, I remember being in classes and learning about, labor in animals and really thinking like, oh my gosh, like this is so different than it is in people, So there's the way we approach labor in animals, we really separate farm animals from like cats and dogs. So our classes are very, very different. And kind of medicine in general in animals is very, very different for farm animals and cats and dogs. I feel like cats and dogs, we're treating more and more like people the way we do medicine, where we're a lot more hands-off with farm animals. We're a lot more focused on lifestyle and what they eat and the environment and all that kind of stuff. So maybe a little more holistic in that sense. But so they were basically telling us, we only get called in to help if there's something going wrong. So at the base, labor in animals is hands-off. It's not looked at a medical problem. It doesn't involve a medical professional. It's really done. The animal does it at home alone. But as with everything, sometimes things can go wrong, and that's when a vet will be called in. And there was tons of focus on like, if you go, you can't bring anybody with you, and you have to be quiet, and you have to keep the lights down. And I remember the horse vets telling us like, wear the farmer's coveralls to hide your smell. It's all about keeping it as calm and quiet and dark. And if you freak the animal out, then you will most likely stall the labor. And if it's already having a bit of issues, the last thing you want to do is stall a labor. And it was all about fear and the hormones of fear being completely counterintuitive to the hormones of delivery. So basically, like when you're scared, it's all about cortisol secretion. And when you're in labor, you want the oxytocin, so the love hormone, and they just aren't compatible. And so any kind of fear to an animal will stall, cortisol will override the oxytocin and it'll stall the labor. And I mean, there's reasons you don't want, an antelope giving birth on a savanna. If there's a lion that comes towards it, you want to be able to stall labor, and it's there for a reason. And there's reasons why you want to stop. If it's not safe, it's not good to bring this newborn baby into the world. So there's reasons for that. And I just thought it was really, really funny. And at the time I hadn't had kids. So I assumed it was a difference between us and them. And it's funny. So that's how we were really taught for kind of like farm animals or exotics and things. For cats and dogs, it's a bit different. Again, they deliver at home alone, but there's a lot more problems with cats and dogs, or more dogs, because of all the breeds, right? So we've kind of gone in and made a lot of problems with breeds. And so there are certain breeds that do have trouble delivering, and then we're a lot more implicated. But I do feel now as a vet that sometimes we need to pull ourselves away. Like we need to remove ourselves a little bit more. And that's based on, after having my kids. So when I had mine, I just remembered reading a bit and being like, oh, so, like a horse. So basically I just need to do what they told me to do with a horse. That's pretty logical. And it kind of all made sense. Yeah.
Well, I remember when you introduced that concept to me, I really felt like fireworks or light bulbs were going off in my brain. Like I was like, wow, you only are ever exposed to birth in one way. Like unless like your mom's a midwife or you happen to be in the natural community. But it was just like, I was like, yeah, that makes so much sense. Why is it that in every single movie, it's like a woman screaming in pain in the hospital, and like 9 times out of time, there's something traumatic going on. It's never like, you never see an easy birth on TV. There's always something like that. And so when you made those two parallels, I was like, huh,
Yeah.
like stress hormones, like this all makes sense. Like, wait, we are animals, but we do, and we're rational beings. So if anything, like we're probably more likely to switch on that with the lights and with the doctors coming in and out and the white coats. And
I think
anyways, just
even because exactly what you said, we can think. So it doesn't even need to be that much. Like it doesn't even need to be like an animal. Basically, it's not analyzing the situation, but anything that can trigger us to feel fear. Like even if it's not environmental, as like a negative thought or somebody's doubting look or something being offered to you, like any kind of doubt will implant fear, and that's enough to have it. So I think it's harder for us to get to this place where we're relaxed and natural and relaxed, and our hormones are taking over. For sure, I think it's that much more of a challenge, and for sure, it's. I think one of the greatest differences is that labor has become a medicalized act. So like even a labor that's going well, that has no complications, it's still done in a medical setting. And as medical professionals, we know it's normal, but what we're taught, our role is to take care of sick patients. So like whether it's me, it's animals, or a doctor, it's a human, but the role is not to take care of someone that doesn't need us, right? So already if you're having, when you're in a setting where people are looking for red flags, that's what you're looking for. So, yeah, so that's one of the beauty about, like, anytime a dog comes into clinic or a cat comes into clinic and they don't need to be there, my first response is like, no, why did you come? You know, like, because I was like, if there wasn't a problem, there might be one now. And so I approach it very differently, because now the situation is different. Now they've been in a car, they've come to a clinic. Now, like, the lights, the stress, the triage. And
on top of them probably being in pain already, it's like,
it's so funny. I'd love to know, because it really, I've had an intern, so it's a vet that's kind of doing a year specialty, a bit like a residence in the juice, like and I was in the ICU, and he brings me this and I'm known at work for like the person that likes to do the puppies and the kittens, and I'm like, it doesn't stress me out at all. Like, I'm like, bring it on. And so he's like, I'm just going to put her here for 2 seconds. And I'm like watching this dog, and I was like, yeah, just put her. And she's like in her little box, and I could see her out of the corner of the eye, and I'm doing like my paperwork, and I could see her like having these contractions, and just quietly she gave birth to all 7 puppies. And he runs back like an hour later, and he's like, I'm like, it's all good. And he was like, what? I was like, she's got it. Like, look at her. She's just like in her box beside me in her little zone. And I could just tell that I was like, she's in the zone. Just let her do her thing.
Yeah.
And anyway,
yeah. That's so funny. Just in her little box.
And with like the commotion around her. And that's when I laugh. Like, when it goes well and when you're in the zone, like it was chaos in the ICU, but she was just like, she was in her little protective area, and she was completely like in this little trance and having no problems at all, delivering all her puppies.
I love that. I love that. So would you say that most animals, like, because now at this point you've probably delivered several, like, what would you say is the major differences, like, between humans after, going through birth or seeing it in the media? And
so I think, so what we portray in labor, I think, is a bit, I mean, it's dramatized, like there's so much drama around it. And it's often like comedy, and it's for the effect. So like, I think what we see in labor and what the actual act is very different. That said, like, just full disclosure, like, I haven't had labors like everybody else, and it's really, really hard when we talk about labor and women, because it's really hard to put, explain what labor is to one person. Like, everybody's going to go through it differently based on, their physiology, the baby's physiology, their, what's important to them, how, and there's not one rule fits all. And I've noticed in talking about it over the years that people can get really defensive, because there's this guilt associated if you, like, I don't know, you feel like you didn't do it naturally, right? Or like if you needed help or whatever. And I really And I find sometimes it's hard for me to talk about it because like I had them at home, and it was like this, for me, labor was like a crazy empowering act or activity I did that I say it's kind of like running a marathon or doing an Ironman. Like it wasn't easy. It was super challenging, but it was more mental than physical. And then at the end was like, to this day, there's nothing that's ever given me that like full body, like it's just euphoria. It was life-changing. It literally was. Like I remember looking over at Sean after giving birth and being like, oh, you poor, like weak men that cannot like bring life. Like I just had this like, oh, you will never understand. Like I remember thinking, like, and I remember just being on this like this crazy high after. Yeah. And it's sometimes hard for me to explain that story to people because not everybody's birth is like that. And it's not saying that my experience was better or that I just think like I was lucky to run into the people like the Karen at CrossFit. The people in my, like when I was pregnant with, it's funny. So I don't know this where you want to go, but I'll just explain a story that kind of explains.
I'm ready to go anywhere.
So I was sitting in class listening to all these classes about animals, and we're very standoffish, right? We don't do much. We kind of like watch from a distance. You're there in case, but you're basically like, let them do what they do. And I'm thinking to myself like, like what went wrong with us? Like, why? Like, I just thought that we were different. Like something along our evolutionary line meant that we just couldn't do it by ourselves. Because I had this belief that we couldn't, like I had this. Yeah. So I graduated, and then I remember getting pregnant, and I was doing my rotation. Like after I was a vet, but I was in a hospital doing rotations and working 100 hours a week, and I didn't have so much nausea. It disappeared. I felt pretty energetic. I was doing nights and surgeries and on call. And I was like, my mentality was literally like, well, when time comes, I guess they'll just tell me what to do. And I just kind of like put my pregnancy on the back burner, kept doing my stuff, and was like very nonchalant about it. I just assumed like you just show up that day and then someone will coach you. I'll tell you how it's done. And I didn't really think anything of it. And I was like right in my, like I was at the height of my specializing. So I was like right in the medical paradigm. And then I had a miscarriage, which again, which is part of any woman who's fertile, who's trying to have a baby. It's a part of it all. Like we all go through it. And I remember getting to the hospital, and I was very pragmatic. I was like, my scientific mind was like, clearly there's something wrong. This is meant to be. And I don't know if I had really had that like connection yet to like being pregnant and that whole. And I remember the doctor giving me my options, saying like, well, we can either, let this go on like you're going. We can either do a DNC, or I can give you something to make it go quicker. And at that point I had been cramping and having like a period, and I thought, oh, it'll be fine. I'll just, go on as is. I kind of went because I wanted just the peace of mind knowing like where we stand, because I had to work that week, right? So I was like, Then I go home, and no one gave me any warning as to what was about to happen, that I was going to go home and I would have to literally have a mini labor. Like no one even like brought it up. So that was a kind of shock. And so I remember when contractions started, I could not breathe. I remember my whole body was like contracting. Oh my gosh. And then I just remember people saying like, you need to breathe. You like people when they talked about their labor. And at this point I was I was 12 weeks. So I hadn't told anybody yet because I was waiting for that. So I was like, nobody was aware. And I remember my whole body contracting and being like, I had to breathe, but I couldn't. I was like, how do you take a breath in when your whole body is contracting forward? And I remember thinking like, anyway, so the whole thing lasts 2 hours. My husband just happens to come home and find me, and he kept being like, Kelly, breathe. And I was like, I can't breathe, because I was like, I physically can't open up with everything contracting.
My diaphragm, it's like...
And I was just, anyway, so the whole thing lasted 2 hours, and then I remember, and it was done. And then I remember thinking, how do people do this for 24, 36, 48? I remember being like, I physically couldn't. And then from that moment, I kept posing questions to people, just kept asking. Yeah. And so then when it came time that I got pregnant again, I became obsessed with learning how to breathe contractions. Okay. Like that, and that was the trigger that started it all. So I just kept going down these rabbit holes, like reading books, but like, I don't understand physically how you're supposed to breathe while you're having these contractions that feel like everything's coming onto you. Like you're rolling into this like fetal position, but you really need to relax. And the more I kept reading, the more it was about like relaxing and breathing. And of course, if you start Googling breathing in pregnancy, you start getting towards, and so I started to get funneled towards like different people with different opinions. And then I fell onto Unmedicated, who is like the guru of all midwives. She's like the most famous midwife, and she's got like techniques that they teach in obstetrics about positions that she uses. Amazing. So I just started to read her books, and then it just kind of changed like my whole persona, and it just made sense with me because I had learned about how animals do it, and then all these books I was reading was a lot more what I had learned, and so it kind of just brought me on a different path. So it wasn't because and all that was luck. Like it was luck that like, and it's funny, like it was that miscarriage gave me a window into what was coming when I would actually deliver, and allowed me to understand what it entailed, how intense it would be, and it prepared me to like take all the steps. So that's how, and then that's when I met me. Like you and I met when I was pregnant with my first, and I was lucky enough that I was off work at the end, and I literally was immersed in like meditation and hypnobirthing, and I worked out, and it was like my whole life, and I was lucky. Like some women are working full time and have stressful jobs or other kids at home, but I literally was on this, like, I looked at labor like I was going to do a triathlon, you know? And I was like, I hate running. So for me, it was like, that would probably be the hardest thing that I would ever do in my life. And I would not expect to show up the day of a triathlon going, so tell me how I'm going to do this, which is how I would have done it with my first pregnancy. Like I would have showed up. And so then I realized like this is a mental game. And it made sense. Like when athletes go to the Olympics, they're like visualizing their race and they're visualizing the game. Like, we know that your brain, you know, like the signals you send your brain, the stories that you tell yourself, they impact how your body acts. And so it was all about that. And I also looked at the whole act of labor, like this intense rite of passage that was going to be hard for a reason. So you asked me about animals in pain. So like, and that's why I talked to you about that dog in a box. Like she didn't say anything. Like she said nothing looked hard. It really looked effortless. Mind you, her babies are a lot smaller than our one giant headed baby, but like it literally was effortless. And so I was like, they're not scared, right? Because for them, it's like it's you know, their hormones are in charge and it's instinctual, and it really is like watching an animal give birth. It's completely instinctual. So I was like, there's a reason that ours is the way there is. Like, there has to be a reason why it's so intense. It lasts so long. Like, we make these noises. And so I was going to like, I'm going to accept whatever it is and just, it's like that for a reason, you know, like it's got to be like that for a reason. If it's painful or intense, it's painful for a reason. So I literally, and it was my first labor was because I did so much homework or whatever, like I was so mentally prepared for it. There was like no way that it wasn't going to be this like blissful event. And it literally ended up being this amazing experience that was life-changing. But I always compare it now, like, to like rites of passage that people did. Like if you look at any kind of, you know, more indigenous culture, there's always these rites of passage into different parts of your lives where you go through something, like whether it's, I don't know, like, there's one where like they I don't know what they're called. You like don't eat or drink or have water for days until you hallucinate. And like, there's all these, you know, cutting and like all these, and I mean, they serve a purpose. Like every culture has them. And I really think that it is kind of a rite of passage on its own. And I think the problem is that we have taken something that probably should be ritualistic. You know, you should probably have like a bunch of women drumming and dancing around a fire and like to help you get into this like meditative trance that you literally, I mean, if you're not in that trance, like it was much harder for my other two because everything went quicker. I had this like labor that lasted days. It was like it allowed me to slowly get there. It was much harder with my other two. But if you get to that place, it literally is blissful. Like I remember nothing being too hard. Like everything was, it just felt just so natural. And I don't even feel like, I feel at some point that I was a fly on the wall watching the whole thing unfold, you know? But then again, I was lucky in many aspects. I was lucky that I ran into the people that told me the stories, that I ran into the research that I did, that, and what's funny too, is I was followed by a doctor my whole first pregnancy. And the one thing I really didn't want was to be induced with my first labor, because I was like, I don't want artificial oxytocin pushing against a closed cervix. And I know that especially if I've never had a baby before, I just knew that was like the first string of things that could go wrong. And I understand there's moments that you have to, but I just didn't want to rush into it. And I was having a really hard time being heard by my doctor. And funny enough, I'm not very good with authority. Like I can't really stick up for myself, which is weird. But even though I'm like medically trained, when I'm with the doctor, I just can't argue. And so I just was like, how am I going to get to the point of my labor where I need to advocate for what I want if I can't even, just kept pushing my dates up. So, I mean, in hindsight, had I stayed with the doctor, I would have been induced. And I just, at 22 weeks, I was talking with my sister, and then the yoga teacher overheard, and there happened to be a bunch of cancellations at the birthing center, and she said, you should try it out. She was a midwife in training. It was just like, so there's like a whole series of events that brought me to where I was, but it was by no means that I knew that I could do this. It was just meeting the right people along the right way. And so Karen, who I met at CrossFit, she had 4 kids, and she was talking about how terrified she was of labor. And like, even for her fourth, she decided to do like hypnobirthing because she couldn't relax. Like so I was like, and then, so this is it. So I did a whole bunch of different stuff, but I really do think there's something about the actual act of labor that is like that for a reason. And I really do think it is a gift.
I couldn't agree more. Like, I think like the weight of what a parent is, like if you could just like, it's just like a little poop and the baby comes out. Like it just, you would not feel the weight of the importance of like this next step of your life. Cause I've never given birth, but every woman that I talk to says it's like, you know, it's like, it's this transformation that happens. It's inexplicable is what everyone always says to me, but it's like that part of your life that is no longer. And I think if you don't have that feeling and that extreme, and you were actually the first one to really talk to me about like the extreme, like the euphoria versus the like labor, the difficulty of labor, like that contrast makes it even more feeling like of a rite of passage, and that stark contrast of like, wow, like I'm a mom, like I'm mothering this child, like my being has changed.
And also it's like going through something really difficult. Like it's so funny, but I did ayahuasca like 5 years later, and I remember feeling like I was being like broken apart into pieces. And it was like the worst torture I have ever been in. And it wasn't painful, but I don't know how to describe it other than it was torture. And I remember calling out and saying, what do I do? And they said, let go. And I didn't know how to let go. And then like everything just went dark and then it disappeared. And I just had this wave of, and I just remember laughing and having this wave. And I remember looking at the guide and saying, it's like labor. I was like, it's like going through labor. Yeah. And it was like, that was the closest thing I'd ever had. And it was like, it wasn't painful per se, but it felt way worse. It felt like I don't know. It was like the only thing I remember after being like, it was like the worst torture you could possibly go through as a human being was how I described it. But it wasn't painful. And like, who knows what it was, but I was like, if you talk about people who have had huge breakthroughs with like ayahuasca or like any kind of like, I don't know, got over some illness with like a physical feat, it's kind of always the same story. Like, I really do believe that it has to be like that hard things really, really make us like persevering through them, bring us to a better place. And so when I talk, like when you hear about people talk about things like ayahuasca and how like it helped them, then it for me, it made the parallel. I was like, there's a reason why labor is like that. But I just think my mom also, like, my mom talks about labor like, oh yeah, I went in, had you guys, came home. Like she just is like the most zen person talking about labor. Like nothing frazzles her. And so I grew up with this woman who talked about, like, they had a small hospital with no anesthesiologist, so it wasn't an option but she was just like, oh, and you guys were so cute. And like her talks about labor were not fearful at all. Like my mom makes everything look easy. So I didn't have this like fear of it. And then when I realized like, oh, we're not broken like I thought we were. It's just that we just need to know that, you know? And that said, I know it's tough because like there, you know, there's medical reasons why you can't, and there's age reasons and fertility reasons, and there's a million different reasons why you might be followed and why people don't really want to let you do. And I get it too. And there's, if you're lucky enough that that's how it is for you.
What I always tell women too, like, cause I always find there's such a shame around like drugs and conventional medicine now. And it's like, for me, like, cause I love everything that you're talking about in theory right now, but I don't know when I'm actually pregnant, like how will I feel safest? And I think that's what I always tell people. I'm like, however you feel safest is like the most important thing for you. And for some people, medical intervention scares them way more, and they feel like they can be way more calm, like separate from that. Whereas some people, they need to know that if something goes wrong, that they have the security behind them.
And there's that too. Like I'm medically trained, so like I could listen to the heartbeat between contractions of my own baby. Like I remember when my third was born, and everybody was freaking out because he had this like saccadic respiration, and I had to tell everybody to take a deep breath. And like
you were calming everyone down.
because I was like, this is fine. I remember like I had a midwife in training, and it was her last week, so it was she was in charge of the labor, and the baby comes out, they give it to you, and then they all kind of disappear for an hour, and they came back and they were doing all the exams, and then when they pulled him off me, he got really mad, and he started. And he was breathing like he was pulling like under, you could see like the ribs coming in. And everybody, and then they put him on a saturate, like they were taking a saturation. And so I use the same machine on animals all the time. And like cats and dogs, like I can never get a saturation because they're always moving. Yeah. So it wasn't getting a saturation. Everybody's freaking out. And I was like, and they ended up calling the children to see if like we need to be transferred. And I was like, oh God, I don't want to have to put boots on. Like I'm in my bed. Like, oh, it's winter. I was like, and I knew that everything was fine. And then the pediatrician was like, it's fine, you know? But I just saw how quickly, like everybody's trained for these like emergency situations. And I like the midwives are too, like they have all the crash cart and everything. And it's like, when you're trained to look for it, like, so that was like, that's a red flag. And it is a red flag, like 100% that kind of breathing is a red flag. But and again, like because I'm medically trained, like I know what's normal, what's not normal. And so it's probably way easy for me to let go than someone who doesn't know what's normal or not. For sure. And I always tell that to people. It's like the most important thing about labor is not to be stressed. So if you're in a hospital and being in a hospital makes you less stressed, then that's better. But also there's this, like, as much as I do think labor can be this like amazing, beautiful experience, sometimes it just doesn't happen. And then you realize, like when you go through the nights of crying and the nursing and the tear nipple, like the whole shebang. And then you're like, it is just one day of your life. Right? So if that day is not important to you, I don't think it matters so much. It's when that day for you is super important, when the labor for you is super important, then I think it's important how it goes down. But if you couldn't care less and you just want to go to the hospital, then that's okay too, because honestly, like it's one day and then you have this baby for like the next all these years. And then I find like we put so much emphasis on something, especially like, and it literally, it's the day's gone before you know it. And then you've got a much bigger, like something much bigger to take care of. That's much, and you get there no matter what. Like I do believe the hormones help you with the breast milk and help you connect and help you with I think mostly with the like postpartum feelings. So I was like, this whole concept that postpartum is like something that affects somebody is hogwash. Like you are going through a tremendous life-changing experience that we never talk about as women without a village. And then you're like changing your identity. And, you know, we've been raised, like I was raised my whole life being like, I can do whatever my husband does, probably better. Like that's how I thought. And then all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, my life is a lot different than his now. Like, and that whole, so like we all go through these huge changes in motherhood. at different times of it. And it is just a day. I do think that day can help, like, I think it can help with like the transition and everything. Cause but I think if it doesn't happen for you, or if it's a route that someone doesn't change, like there's just, for me, it's just like no guilt. Like the last thing I want to do is to guilt rid someone. But for somebody who wants to know if it's possible or wants to have that experience, I certainly think it's worth trying.
Yeah. On that note, and also kind of what you were talking about before about, you having, let's say, like the luxury of having some time off where you can kind of like nurture your pregnancy and research. And I think it really comes down to, we live in a patriarchal society where it's like, I see women on a daily basis who are pregnant, and it's just like, they're just like expected to work when they're physically ill, in a lot of them, in their first trimester. And it's like, your productivity doesn't stop and you can't use this as an excuse. And then, second trimester can be okay for some people. And then third trimester, they're expected to keep working up until their due date. Like, I just find that that's so backwards. And like, some people will like roll their eyes at me like, oh, you're such a feminist. And I'm like, no, like, can't you see that that is like a world made for a man? It's like, why are you like growing a human being? Like, they can't even fucking do that. And you're expected to
we're allowed
work.
to swear on this podcast.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's just like, it's like, you should have time to like form that connection with baby. You shouldn't have the pressure of like performance when you're pregnant, in my opinion. And then, cause then I find it's even harder. Like, women don't take the time to like research pregnancy or to like, and then pregnancy feels like a trauma for a lot of women that I treat, because, you're seeing your gynae. A lot of them, it's like 5 minutes in and out. Like, your hand isn't being held through this like amazing thing. Nobody's rallying behind you, which is what I love about a midwife, is that, they're empowering you. Like, you got this, like, it's just, whereas it's just like,
and also, like, I remember reading in the Ida Mae Gaskin book, which is A Guide to Childbirth, I think it's called. And she talks, like, she had 2 obstetrician couples as, like, patients at one point. And the woman was like, I've never seen a natural labor because I'm an obstetrician. So, like, all the cases I see are things that go wrong. Yes. What I see, too. I don't see, like, when I brought that dog home this fall, it's the first time I've ever seen a dog, well, I mean, except for the dog in the box. But, like, I never see dogs delivered no problem. Like when they come in, it's because it's not going well. Like, otherwise they wouldn't be at the hospital. And so I think having someone that recognizes what's normal or not, like that, like my labors took days. My first one, I started on a Friday, I had him on a Tuesday. There's no way I would have been able. And I remember my mom texting Sean on Sunday, like, it's been a long time. And he creeping into the room and being like, your mom's worried. And I was like, give me my stethoscope. And like, at 140 or whatever it was, I was like, it's fine. Tell her it's fine. Like, but I would, like, I don't know if I would have, and it's not the fault of the hospital. Like, it's proven, like, every time you have a shift change, you have more chances of having an error. So you let a lady labor for 3 days in that room. I tell you, like, that's too many shift changes. Something's going to be forgotten. Something's going to be errored. Like, I can name like 5 people offhand that I treated. Like, a friend of mine just had a C-section. They came in and literally took the baby and put it like basically like near her wound, and they're like, oh, you had an emergency C-section, I forgot. Like, as if it wasn't traumatic enough. And then I had somebody else who had a miscarriage, and they're like, so how's baby? And it's like, no, I'm here. Like, I was like, I had a miscarriage at like 28 weeks. Like, it's like, there really is and like, I hear this story often. It's like, the shift change is real. And I think we unfairly put this role onto hospitals that's not their role. Like, it's not the role of a hospital's a hospital, and they're like, we all know how hospitals run. Like, there's not enough staff. There's a lot of high stakes things. There is a lot of people in emergencies. You can't ask. When I'm in the emergency, like, my heart rate is going like. I remember trying to do acupuncture between patients. I was like, I physically cannot do acupuncture in this hospital because my mindset is completely different than when I'm working the emerge. And so there's that village, and that's why, like, doulas in hospitals, like, somebody to take care of your emotion and someone to take care of your, because they can't, like, it's too heavy on the hospital. And that's why, I mean, there are countries where, there's midwives in hospitals, and like, the doctor comes in when you're
in
pushing.
the US.
And so, it's just, and just also, like, just a plain village, like just having people around you that have done it before, that know what they're doing, just to kind of, I always say that, like, you come home with this child, and I remember there's like, I think everybody is so afraid one thing goes wrong, and it is terrible. And people are willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that thing doesn't go wrong. So let's say your labor goes disastrously and you end up in the worst case scenario for you personally, and you didn't want to be induced and you didn't want to C-section. At the end of the day, if mommy and baby are healthy, then that's the end point that they're striving for. The emotional, experience of the mother is not, they don't, like, it's not, nor can they, like, they don't have the reason. No. So it's like, the outcome is I've got a healthy mom, healthy baby. Like, that is a 100% successful outcome. And when I'm at work, that's what our outcomes are too. Sometimes I send the dog into C-section because I don't know if it can labor, and I also don't know if it's necessary. But at this point, it's like, save mom, save babies, 100% guaranteed this route. Exactly. And sometimes there's always like the voice in the back of my mind, like, could she have done it naturally? And I was like, well, we've kind of made it harder for her, bringing her in here in this, and so, and that's what that's what I think is broken, is that because we've changed our view of pregnancy, which is only the last 100 years, really, from like this event that takes home in the home with midwives to something that is in hospital. We've changed the support system and the experience for a woman. And it's not, like, the hospital can't change, like, it's a functioning hospital. So you really need to make that experience for you. And like, both my sisters ended up having natural labors in a hospital because they had no problem with it, because they knew what they wanted, and they were lucky enough that, like, everything progressed as it should. And everybody was super happy. Everybody said the nurses were like loving it. Like, my older sister was like, nurses kept coming in to watch because, like, they never get to see, like, this person on all fours, like, mooing like a cow, like, trying to, like, so, so I think we've taken away I think we don't, like, and like, when that first time I got pregnant, where I was like, oh yes, and you were talking about taking care of yourself. Yeah. So my view on that was like, I'm not sick. Like, I'm not sick. I'm pregnant. I can do whatever. And like, I literally, and now I had my 3 kids, all my hair fell out. I kept getting mastitis. I had styes. Like, I just was breaking after having my kids. Cause I was like, oh yeah, this is quite taxing on the body. Like, I was like nursing or pregnant nonstop 3 in a row. And then I was like, everything was falling apart. And like, basically anytime, no one ever said anything to me unless I'd go to like an acupuncturist, and they'd be like, oh, whoa, like, you gotta stop. Like, and they were talking about like all my, my chi and all this, and they were right. Like, I literally was like, I was just deficient of everything. They had me on like so many, I was drinking bone broth, and they were like, and in traditional Chinese medicine, there's supposed to be at least 2 years between your children, because you need to restore all your stores of vitamins, and all you're depleted, right? Yeah. And you are tired. And I think my outlook on it has changed too. Me, it's more, like, you have a child that's sharing your blood. And if you're constantly in a state of stress where your cortisol is high, like, you've got a baby developing in an environment where there's high cortisol. And then there's a lot of studies like about, like, postpartum links, like, where you will be using the adrenals of the baby, and then when you deliver, then you no longer have the cortisol secreted from the baby, and then you have, like, you crash, and there might be a link between postpartum. So I definitely think, and I think the problem too is that if you've done it and you were expected to work through labor and breastfeeding and everything, and now the next generation doesn't have to. Well, I had, so I think we don't help ourselves either as women. Like, I hear a lot of like, well, I had to. But should we have to? Like, it's such a short time in our life. Like, I've heard women say things about women, like, like, well, should they have that job because they're going to go on mat leave? And it's, and I'm just like, how many years, like, how many people, like, people aren't gone for 2 decades. Like, they're gone for a year, they're gone for 2 years, 3 years. Like, how many, it's in a career, it's such a short time. But yeah, you're right. And I've changed my tune on that too. I would have been on the camp, like, I'm not sick, I can do anything. Like, I remember I was going to CrossFit like 5 times a week during my pregnancy. Like, mind you, I didn't have any children at home, but I definitely was more delicate and took more care of myself as they went on, because I realized what my body was going through, and probably not enough, because I was pretty broken after having them all. So there's definitely I agree with you 100%. And it gets really touchy. That's another touchy topic.
I was just treating my cousin this weekend after delivering, and her husband were joking that her body feels like mashed potatoes right now. And I just, every woman that I talk to, it's like they're like, I can't even explain it. It's just like everything feels different. Like my joints, my organs, my hair. It's like you feel the weight of like what you just did.
And some things never change, but then some things, the body's insane. It's like nothing ever happened. Like, it's just insane. Like, yeah, it's a pretty mind-blowing experience. Yeah. And yeah, I definitely think there's like one thing I think like, the ritual of it all is what we've lost the most, and what is so important.
Yeah. And it's funny, I was treating this man from the Congo, and he was telling me like how he doesn't understand how anyone in Canada has more than one baby. He's like, she's like, drastically, we're more than you, or here everyone is more of like an individualistic society. Whereas back home, it's way more community. He's like, here, if anyone does you a favor, like you always kind of feel indebted. You don't want to ask anything of anyone. You don't want to step on anyone's toes. I mean, I hear it all the time, like, oh, like she needs a lot of help and she's still thinking of having another baby. Like, like I hear that, like those comments. And then I think back and I think about him, and he was like saying like at home, like his mom would just like literally grab him any time of the day without warning, go over the neighbors, be like, I'm going to get groceries, like, and just plop him on the ground. And like, they'd watch TV while she goes and does things, and she'd do the same. And it was like, no questions asked, just like, it takes a village.
It does take a village.
Like, it's hard. And women don't have that anymore. And like now amplify that with like social media, like that you need to be a perfect mom and be productive in this like productivity focused society. It's like, it's like no kidding, postpartum.
Oh,
like,
yeah. You definitely don't have a village, and life is busy. Yeah. So if you think of, that's another thing. Like if you think of how, we would have been as a society, there's like, would have been many moms with kids, many moms nursing. You probably would have like even shared nursing with someone else. You probably would be like, brought your child in the night when it's crying, and then been able to pass out while somebody else takes care of it. Like, and a lot of traditional cultures, like I remember going up to northern Canada, and like a lot of the grandparents had the babies, and because they were older, so they're taking care of the babies because the parents are physically stronger, and so they're doing some of the work, right? So a lot of, and traditionally that like, a 20-year-old is less wise than the 40 or 50-year-old, so that's why grandma and grandpa have more of a role in raising, because they are much wiser. We don't, and even, it's, I think also too is like, we kind of, there has to be this like, just let go and accept that it's normal. Like, and we all have different, different thresholds of what we can stand, as far as like how crazy the house gets, how messy it is, how like you are overwhelmed with, like how much you need, how much sleep you need, or how much sleep you don't need. And like, and everybody's different, but we definitely don't have the help that we should have. And I have a lot of friends that aren't from here that I met in vet school, and they would always pass comments like how crazy, how we live in like little isolated bubbles. And definitely. And I think that's, it's hard. It's hard afterwards. And again, like I was lucky that I couldn't go back to work as I was nursing. And so I was off for like the 3 kids. And I mean, it was life-changing for us. It changed everything. And it was just, like one of the best unexpected perks of my job. But it really, and because it's such a short time of their life, and it goes by really quick, and of your life too, You definitely need time to process it and to rest and everything.
Yeah, I look forward to the day where like we celebrate. And I've never even given birth, but like I just, I hear the same narratives, and it's just like, oh man, like I just wish, the pressure could be taken off, and women could like, I feel like a lot of women can't really just enjoy like the process of doing nothing, like the beauty of like doing nothing and enjoying your kid. It's like you always have to be the best and like productive, and I don't know.
But I think too,
it's hard to slow down.
Yeah, and I it's funny too. all the lessons I've learned in life and all like, it was kind of like having kids brought me to this crescendo where I realized like, it's all just too much. Like everything that we do. And it's like at one point you can't keep up, like, and then it's kind of like the surrender. And sometimes I see people who are like pregnant with their first, they're just starting. And I remember being angry that like, how come no one talks about this? Like no one explains any of it. But now that I'm gone through it and I see other people, I was like, what do you say? Like, what do you say to someone in a sentence? It's like, it's just, and then you're like, cause now I'm like, oh, you'll go through a bunch of shit. You'll have a lot of emotions. You'll make a lot of decisions. You'll let some things go. You'll learn some things. And in the end, it's all fine. So I was like, and now I again, I'm like, no one wants suggestions if they haven't been asked for your, like no one unsolicited advice, but yeah, it, yeah.
Yeah. So another question I wanted to ask for people who may be interested in learning more, I was just curious if you could share kind of your experience at the birthing center, and then did you do at home also?
Yeah, I did at home as well.
Just what that was like, because I always find it so funny to hear like how they bring out the menus. Like, what would you like to do?
It's waffles. So what happened, it was like at 22 weeks, I was just at this point where I was kind of panicky with my doctor, and someone said there was an opening, so I called the birthing center. And my husband at the time, which is so funny because he's like all about everything natural and holistic and this, he was like, maybe not for number one. And I was like, And at this point I had read like, first of all, if anybody's even curious about this, kids or not, read Ina May Gaskin's A Guide to Childbirth. Like, even if you don't want kids, like it's such an amazing book. So I was like, no, we're doing this. I went to one appointment, and it's an hour long. Sat on a sofa. It was just like, she did her exam, and then we just talked for the rest of the 45 minutes. And as you can see, I could talk, and I always had tons of questions and opinions, and and Sean's funny, like in his podcast, he never told me this, but he said like, he would see me sometimes like go off, and the midwife would just listen to me. And like, I would just be vocalizing worries or whatever. And then by the end of the appointment, I had gotten it off my chest. So it's just like, it's basically somewhere where you have like a safe space for an hour. The beauty is they're always on time because they have these like hour appointments. So you're never waiting. Yeah. They do everything there. Like they do all your blood work and they send it out to their own labs. So you never have to go anywhere. You don't have to wait anywhere. You're never having to like go to the hospital for blood tests. It's amazing. And anytime there's a decision to be made, they give you like a whole bunch of literature, and then they have like summaries, and then you have to decide like whether you're going to do IV antibiotics, whether the baby's going to get antibiotics in their eyes, whether they're going to get vitamin K. Like they're not for or against. They provide the literature. They show you what the norms are across like the G8, and then you decide for yourself, all based on stats, which I love. And I remember when I was thinking about it, like, so funny. I like did this like meta-analysis, and I was looking at all like the articles about like success rates, like obstetrician versus family doctor versus midwife practitioner versus like midwife RN. It's like, and I was like looking at all, and I was like, before I made my decision and the outcomes, it was basically like they're in black and white, that the outcomes were the same, if not a tiny bit better, but not statistically better with midwives for and you can't be with midwife if you're at risk. So like if you have any risk factors, you can't be. So like they're only seeing women that have no risk factors, and the outcomes were better, and the rate of intervention was like, well, there is no intervention, right? So it was just black and white. And then I remember Health Canada did this whole, like they had a bunch of meta-analyses, and their conclusions were like they need to invest more in midwifery because it would save, theirs was like a financial decision, but it would save I don't know how many billions in because interventions, like you need an epidural, you need to pay an anesthesiologist, you need a C-section, then you have an obstetrician, which is basically a surgeon. So it costs a lot more. So theirs was basically a financial thing, but the outcomes are actually for non-complicated labors are actually like equal, if not better, but not statistically significant. So for me, that was like, okay, if the literature is showing that, then I'm all for it. And then when I went there, I was like, okay, so they follow you through the entire time. And then if at the end, like the last few weeks, after 30 weeks, if something happens and you get gestational diabetes or, like the baby has a complication, they become like almost like your doula. Like you get transferred of care, but then they stay with you because you've at this point been with us for 30 weeks. So they'll go to the hospital with you. And then you can either deliver at the hospital with a midwife, or you could deliver at the birthing center, or you could deliver at home. And so I never want to go to I visited the hospital. But the only thing with the hospital is you have to leave after like a set amount of times because like Sahul. At the birthing center, you're there for usually about 24 hours because
Is it only LaSalle where you can deliver with your midwife?
Yes, or unless there's an emergency, you'll get transferred. So there's a birthing center so if you're from Montreal, there's one on Côte des Neiges, and I don't know what hospital they're affiliated with. The West Island one on Cartier, which is like right near the Pointe Claire Clinic, they're like 6 minutes away from Lakeshore Hospital. So if there's something urgent, you're going to Lakeshore. But like if there's something and they work with LaSalle because LaSalle kind of has the same mentality about birth. So if there's a non-urgent transfer, you'll go to LaSalle. And I actually had a stat, and I'm afraid now I'm not going to have it right. But I remember like so you go to all your appointments. At the end, there's like a parent series where you go like us was Tuesday night where we sat for 2 hours and everybody they would show us videos about how to like what to do for pain and how your partner can help you, and like everybody vocalize questions and fears, and so you have this like whole community. And then the craziest thing is like my girlfriend, her water broke on Christmas Day, and her midwife came to her house I don't know how many times to like check her, so she on Christmas Day. Like, so she never had to go anywhere. And then in the end, like when her labor started, then she went to the birthing center. But just the fact that she stayed in her house in her PJs, like having to put boots on in the winter when you're like 9 months pregnant, like just the fact that, and so she had any questions, and midwife just literally drove to her house, and then you deliver and they come to your house. Like they come. I remember the CLSC nurse came and she was like, how many poops, how many pees, how many, and I was like, I don't know. And then I was like, she left, and I was like, God, that girl needs to take a breath. Like, it's like, it's a baby. Like, he'll poop, and I remember being very zen about it. But the reason why they don't give you all these directives is because they literally come to your house. So they'll see, and they'll ask you questions and they'll weigh the baby. So like you have the person that's been following you, they follow you at home too, and then they follow you at 3 weeks, and then again at 6 weeks. Like, so you're followed, and you literally can call them anytime you want with any questions. And like you have this new baby. And so that's what's pretty cool about it all. I had stats. I remember them telling us, because I remember at one point she was like, 90% of people have successful labors at the birthing center or at home. 10% need to get transferred. And out of the 10%, it's like a 0.05 that's like really, really emergency. Because she goes, most things, like the things that go really wrong and in human hospitals is the same thing. Like babies that die usually have something congenital that wasn't picked up. That's usually it. So let's say, so she's like, that's always like the biggest risk, but the numbers weren't any different in birthing center than hospitals. But she said 10% of women will either like, oh, I need an epidural, I want to go. Or if they see that you're getting like tired, or more like your morale is kind of like you keep saying like, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, then they're not going to take chances. They'll transfer you so that you can get your epidural or so. And like I have a girlfriend, she had her first labor in a hospital. She was induced. It was a disaster. She just felt so deflated after. And I didn't know this. And I was like, she heard me like go off about my ecstatic experience. And so with her second, she had a home birth that she had an amazing experience. And she was and for her third, she had a home birth, but then the baby was shoulder dystocia, and they tried and they ended up transferring her. And when they got there, they just needed more hands, and they ended up getting the baby's shoulders cleared, and the baby's fine, but they were worried about his shoulder. But regardless of where that would have happened, it would have been the same outcome. And we ask her, like, I always say, like, for me, it's a bit biased because I had these great, awesome deliveries. Do you regret it? Like, would you have done it differently? And she's like, no, I'm glad I had a chance to try. I'm glad I didn't end up in C-section. Like, I'm glad. She's just like, they had a big powwow after because it was pretty intense and pretty scary at the end. And she was just like, she seems like she was still happy about her decision to go and everything. So, I mean, as soon as you start talking about numbers of complications, people get really stressed out. And again, like you said, I think you need to do what you feel. But I think if you're trying to make your decision, then you just have to read a little bit about different. I remember going to a mommy's yoga class. There was like, I don't know, 9 of us, and 8 women in a row explained their story about how their kid almost died. And I was like, statistically, that is impossible. Like, I do believe that each of them does think that it was such a bad labor that their baby's life would, like, maybe it was the stern look of the doctor that gave them impression. Like, I am sure that, like, they're not being, like, that they feel, but I was like, statistically, that is impossible. I was like, you know, like, I think, and I don't know, sometimes I'm like, it is so difficult and such a huge feat that is it just that we, like, really want people to understand how hard it was, that we, like, and it is hard, and, like, I'm not belittling it at all, but I was like, more of chance than not, like, it goes well. So,
well, like you said, at hospitals, you know, and I'm not anti-doctor at all. I'm not anti-conventional medicine. I'm with the doctor, several of my friends, and, like, I know that what they're doing is a vocation, and like, they've studied so hard for, like, and they take so much pride in their work, and they do a good job. But like you said, the resources are very strapped. They don't have time to handhold you. And in the hospital, it's like, all they care about is that successful outcome, healthy mom, healthy baby. And so it's like, you know, the baby might be in a position where they can't hear the heart rate. And then they're like, all I know is that if I do a C-section right now, you'll be healthy, and so will the baby. Right now, I can't monitor the baby's heart rate. Whereas, like, a midwife, let's say, might not have that as a red flag as much, because, you know, like, she's seen several times where, you know, the baby turn. I don't know how that works essentially, but, you know, it's like they just want to ensure, like, 100% outcome on both parties. And what for the mom, that can feel like, oh, my baby almost died. Yes. In reality, it's like, no, I just couldn't pick up the.
And that's what I'm saying. I was like, so I think that and I was like, my heart goes out to all of them. I, like, felt terrible for them all. They all had to tell their story. Like, it was scary, but I was like, how sad is it that I'm in a class and all 8 other, like, 9 and 8 of them have this, like, they feel like their baby would have died. I was like, and if that's the conversation that we're having, like, for sure, labor becomes a scary thing. And I'm not saying that they're exaggerating. I'm saying that's exactly it. Like,
that's the impression.
You don't have time. Like, I talk to people, like, sometimes it's hard to explain everything to people, and sometimes it doesn't change anything. Like, if you don't have, like, it's not like that person's better equipped medically to make a decision than you. So sometimes you're not going to have this big long discussion about exactly why you're going into or getting whatever intervention, because you just can't have a debate with everybody every second. And I totally get it. I was going to say something about, I lost my train of thought, but for sure, if it's always portrayed in a scary way. And I remember being in labor, had contractions, and we wanted to buy a camera, and running into parents of a friend of mine that just had a baby. And I'm like having contractions, and I'm not saying anything. And they're like, oh, you're going to the birthing center, or what happens if the baby's something? And I'm sitting there having contractions. Like, are they really telling me about all the things that can go wrong? When I'm, like, clearly about to pop. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And then, so every so often, like, the hardest part of it all is to, like, tune it all down. And I went in there being like, I've got this. I was like, I had zero doubt in my mind that it wasn't going to be, like, the most incredible thing ever. Like, who knows? Like, maybe it was pure luck. Like, it's easy for me to say, like, oh, you know, it's all mindset, because it worked for me, but who knows, you know? And maybe if I had a fourth, it would be completely different. But yeah, I think there's a lot of negative talk, and it makes it really hard for people to get into this, like, so you need to be calm, like the oxytocin cortisol thing. Like, it's a fundamental principle of it all. Like, what would a horse do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just think if you have any doubt in your mind being at the birthing center, I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like you can't. I feel like you have to wholeheartedly believe that's where you...
But you don't, and I also say, like, so there's a lot of bias, because the people that go seek out a birthing center are already going to be people that have a fairly good confidence that they can do it. And they already know what they want.
Introspection.
And they're like, you know, there was, not to be stereotypical, there is a lot of dreadlocks. Like, and, you know, like, there's, like, it's a hippie crowd. Like, it really, really is, you know? And, or it's people who have had a bad experience and like really, really know what they want. So, you know, of course the outcomes are going to be different because you have a different clientele, like, for sure. Like, like Sean and I always laugh, like, we have very, very different discussions with people, because I was like, yeah, but you attract, he's like chiropractor, right? So he attracts a different clientele than I would in a hospital. Like, there's a lot more drama in my discussions because people, like, it's a different, Yeah. So I think there's that bias as well. But there's definite pros about it. Costs less for the government. And they're medically, oh yeah, that's what I want to say. So people are under this people think it's dangerous, right? So a doctor, you can be delivered by an obstetrician that's a specialist, that's surgically trained, or you can be delivered by a family doctor that's done extra rotations in family practice.
Yeah.
They can't give you an epidural and they can't do a C-section, but they work at a hospital where they have access to that. But one of the biggest misconceptions is that you are being followed by a doctor your entire labor. No. You're being followed by a nurse your entire labor. And the doctor is called in if something goes wrong. And at the end, when you're about to deliver, but you're under the care of a nurse who is also trained. And like, these nurses are amazing. And like everybody who comes out of
I've always heard how
say,
good
it's the nurse that does everything, right? So, and what I always tell people is like, so a doctor doesn't do their 5 years of medical training in delivery. A midwife does their 5 years in just delivery. Like in just delivery. Like, so people are always like, yeah, but it's not a doctor. Not only that, like she can do all the resuscitation. Like she's trained to do all that kind of stuff too. She just can't give an epidural because she's not an anesthesiologist. Neither can your family doctor. She can't also do a C-section. Neither can your family doctor. So, but she's there from like the first contraction to the end. She's by your side. Like she's there the whole time.
Yeah.
So you're being monitored by the expert the whole time. It's not that a nurse isn't an expert, but like there's a misconception that like it's the nurse's call. Like the nurse will watch you, and it's the nurse that'll tell you. And that's why, that's why I want to say it. It's like all these fetal monitors and stuff is because that's how they know if they need to come into your room. Like if you have a ward, my midwife has one person delivering that week, just me. Like she doesn't have 10. So she's available to me 24 hours a day. Whereas on a ward, you might have 7 women laboring. So like you need tools to help you. Like if I need to run into that room, then I need to know that somebody's monitoring them. So that's why you have all the, whereas you don't need that in a birthing center because you've got the 2 aid natals and you've got and they're there and they're watching you. So they're physically watching you the whole time. And they come in and out like, my first was I had it in the bed. My second, I had it in a water pool. The third, I had it at home, which by far after I had it at home, I was like, why did I not have them all at home? It was like getting into your own sheets and your own shower after. It was like handing it to my husband and then going into my own shower with my own towels and my own shampoo. So nice. Was like, and then crawling into bed and then Sean running downstairs to get beers. Like it was like the whole thing was amazing. And then they did my laundry and like walked the dog and like they were just it was pretty awesome. But there's definitely.
And what was that like having the boys around, like your older ones?
They weren't there for the actual labor, so I try to remember. So the second one I had a birthing center, so we called my in-laws at like 2 a.m. and went to the birthing center, and poor them, they didn't sleep all night, and so Sean's up all night with me, and he gets home, and his parents hadn't slept, so his parents are like, we gotta go home. And then Sean, who's like been up all night delivering with me, gets handed this toddler that's like 18 months old. And then they're like, and he's not supposed to nap in the morning so that he has a long nap in the afternoon. They hand him a toddler and they're like, and he napped this morning. And Sean was like, so Sean was like, didn't sleep for like 36 hours because he had this like well-rested toddler that had just napped and he just got home and he's like, oh my gosh. Like, and he doesn't get the hormones, right? Like I'm like in this like blissful state where I could not sleep for days. And like, I'm like high, we always laugh. Like, he's like, you're high. Like you're high as a kite. Like you should see pictures of me. Like like the hormones can be pretty intense. He doesn't get them. So he was like, I'm so tired and now I have a toddler. But, and then the third, Sean dropped them off. Like my labor started in the morning and I usually have long labor, so I know when it's coming. Like mine are long. And my waters never break. So that's why they're probably maybe a little more bearable because I never have the head on the cervix. I have this like nice cushy water cushion. And so like they always come out with the water and then the water bursts right at the end of their crowning. So I always have I have this gentle cervical opening with this nice cushy water balloon.
Oh, that does sound very nice.
Yeah. So like, don't let anybody break your water. Just don't let anybody break your water. Like they want it to. So when you break your waters, it releases tons of prostaglandins that really quickens your labor. So it'll often be like offered to, let me just break your water. Yeah. Don't, because like number one, it's a nice little cushion that helps your cervix. Like instead of having the head opening your cervix, you have like a water bubble. Just like think of that. And if your cervix isn't open, you might not necessarily want that rush of prostaglandins to start suddenly having these crazy contractions, because now you have these super strong contraction against the cervix not open. So yes, it quickens it. Who says it needs to be quick? Like, it doesn't need to be quick. Like, every labor I had was harder for me because it was quicker and more intense. Like, yes, it's done quicker, but like there's something to be said. So yeah, like, have a long discussion with your doctor, if you're with a doctor beforehand, whether it needs to be done and why it needs to be done. I mean, you're not gonna be able to do it while you're in labor, so make sure whoever's there advocating for you is like, do we need to? Because that's definitely one thing that I would say is a good thing to. And like, yeah, there's and Ina May Gaskin, basically just anything she says.
Read her book.
Yeah.
So I don't want to take up too much of your day. So I did tease about how you had all the animals living under your house. So I was thinking maybe we could end on that note, if you could just explain like how you ended up in that situation.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm an emergency vet, and I came to the ICU one day, and someone had gotten a dog in the night that had gotten hit by a car, and the owners kind of disappeared because they couldn't really pay the bill. Like, it was going to get pretty expensive. She had like a degloving injury, so all the skin was off her foot, and then we found out she was pregnant, and so she stayed at the hospital for about 2 weeks getting her injuries taken care of. And that whole time the bill was just getting bigger, and we were in communications with the owners. And in the end, she ended up being Lyme's disease and heartworm positive, and it just was getting too complicated. And they, unfortunately, although they must have loved her because she was a sweetheart, she was a great dog, had to give her up because they couldn't afford to take care of everything. So, I was in the ICU the day she came in, and then 2 weeks later, I'm at the ICU again, and I see that she's still there, and I'm just doing math on my fingers, and I was like, guys, like, we took x-rays 2 weeks ago, and you can only see the fetuses are calcified as of 45 days. So she was at least 45 days. And I was like, add 2 weeks to that, they give birth at 63 days. And I was like, oh my God, she's gonna go like any second now. And we have certain times of the year where we get a lot of infectious diseases. Like the fall and the spring, we have a lot of parvovirus, which is
yes.
And most dogs are vaccinated, but not everybody. She's not vaccinated. And I was like, she's not vaccinated. She doesn't have any maternal antibodies. We've had tons of parvo cases. Like, she can't deliver in the hospital. And I must admit that part of me was like, I don't necessarily want her to deliver here, because I was like, she clearly can do it on her own, and I don't want us to get all up in her stuff. Like, I was like, I know she doesn't need anything. Like, I was like, she doesn't need our help, and I want her to be in a place where no one thinks they have to assist her. And so I texted my husband, and I was like, can I bring a dog home? And
I was there when he got that.
Oh, were you? What did
he was, I just remember being like, Kelly wants to deliver the dog at home. And he was just like, I want to do what you want to do.
Yeah, he was like, do you think that's a good idea? And I was like, listen.
Oh, yeah, that's what it is.
So we have 3 boys. We had in 3 years. So the nursery was upstairs, and we had a bedroom on the ground floor. And we had just moved all 3 boys upstairs. We had this empty room. I was like, we have an empty room. Nothing is going on in the world because of COVID. We were like literally home all the time. They're at the perfect age where it'll be fun. And I was like, it's 8 weeks. Like, no matter how disastrous it is, we can do anything for 2 months. So he was like, okay. So I brought her home, and it was amazing. Like, I always say I need to have animals, because every single time my animals go through something, I'm like 100 times better vet. Like, my older dog, like, I'm so much better in geriatrics. I ended up keeping one of the puppies. I'm like so much better at giving advice on puppies. Like, you need to live through it. But it was amazing watching her, and like knowing her temperature came down. And so I didn't know this dog, and I had to bring her with me. Like, I had to be home. It just so happened, I was off 4 days in a row. I never am. So I was like, it's perfect. It's meant to be. And so it was pretty crazy to watch, like, her go into first stage of labor, where she just got up and went to my basement, which she had never been in before, and hid under the bed. So I slept in the basement with her, and like all night I could hear her panting, and I kept like looking. She was fine. And then I had made like this whole nursery, like this whole padded space for her to deliver. I was like, she can't be in the basement. There's like boxes. It's like the worst room in the house. So I like forced her to come upstairs in the morning. And then it had been 24 hours since her temperature dropped, and I was getting like antsy, and I didn't know. And then all of a sudden the like medical part of my brain was working. And I remember sending an email to this like reproduction specialist, like, it's been more than 24 hours since her temperature dropped, because it's supposed to deliver within 24 hours of her temperature dropping, you know, like Like as if that's another thing. Like there's no textbook and there's no like timeline. Like who says it's 24 hours, right? Her was 27 hours. And then she just wrote me back, how many puppies? I said 6. She goes, it'll be fine. And I was like, well, clearly she was worried. She would have written more than one sentence in her email. So, and then I'm just doing work beside her, and all of a sudden I see like her stomach go, oof. And like, I actually have like every single one of her like videos of labor, like on my Instagram. Cause I couldn't stop taking videos. I was like, this is insane. And so like,
I'm so happy that you did.
And I was like, basically like, and it so happened that my mom came over that day, and I was like, you can't leave. I was like, and so she was taking videos, and she went and got the kids out of school. And so like, for example, like I drew all the blinds and the room was warm and it was quiet. And like, I brought one kid in at a time and I made them whisper. And I said, you know, and my youngest one was too hyper, so he wasn't allowed to stay. And then my older one didn't want to. So my middle one stayed, and it was like super quiet. And we had to, you know, like, and we couldn't talk. We just had to watch her. And so she delivered all 6 of her puppies. So you go into stage 1, like stage 2 labor. She starts contractions. She has the baby, then the placenta, and goes back to stage 1 because she has 6, right? She has to go flip flop back and forth. And then watching her like eat, like drink all the amniotic fluid and clean it all up, and then take off the umbilical cord. And like, it was just, it was like clockwork, like watching her do it. And it's funny because she didn't do it in order. Like she would clean up the mess before she would take the baby out of its sack. And I was like, clean up that mess after, like take care of the baby first. And then, but I mean, like the babies can stay in their sack for up to 2 minutes. Like it was fine. She didn't need my help. Like I did help certain things. Like I happen to have like that snot sucker at home because I've got toddlers. So I help suck out there just to help them breathe a little bit better, but she did not need me. There was one umbilical cord. She cut a little, like she just was like, instinctually, she knew she had to cut the umbilical cord, but she just didn't know when to stop. So one was like really short and it was like squirting blood. And I ran downstairs and got like a clamp. But I mean, I'm sure it would have eventually coagulated. Like I'm sure it would have been fine without me. And one of the pups didn't do well, and she kept hiding it outside. Again, it was like the runt, and she like kept getting up in the middle of the night and hiding it. So like they know everything. Like it was pretty crazy to watch.
So interesting.
Yeah, and it was amazing. And now also like I'm a doctor, I'm a vet. I give input on deliveries all the time, but I never saw an animal give birth. Right. And so now like I've seen it A to like Z, how it should go. And so it also helps me now. Like maybe I'm a little like, maybe there were times where they did need my help a little more than I thought. Because when I saw how they should look like when it really goes well. And so now it's a little easier for me to see when like, no, they need a little help.
Where you need your
help. And because there are moments. And so like, I don't want anybody to think that I think everybody should be doing it the way I did it. But like, I definitely think there are times where there are doctors and there's hospitals for reasons. Like when we need help, they are there. And she didn't need my help. I was there to observe, and it was hard for me to just sit back. Like I wanted to get all in there and do stuff, but so she licks them all clean, and she does everything. And then for 3 weeks, she does everything. She cleans up every poop, every pee. She like,
the videos you posted of the babies like chasing her to get milk, and she's just like, fuck off for 5 minutes.
Yeah. After 3 weeks, she was like, I'm out of here. And so they stayed up the whole, so at one point there was like, my house is chaos. Like, so the first 3 weeks was nice and clean. And then when she was done cleaning it up, my house was a poop factory. And then that was a whole, like we would get up at 4 a.m. and Sean would be like gagging as he's walking down the stairs, and we'd open the door and we'd be like, like just everywhere. And then my neighbor who works for CTV would come over with her daughter like every lunch to like one would take the puppies out, and one would clean up all that. It takes a village. Like, oh my gosh. It was quite, but it was great. It was chaos for 8 weeks, but it was super fun. And
well, I mean, I feel like it's an amazing experience for your boys too. Like,
and so I made like so I kept one of the puppies, and so I started an Instagram called Life by Jakey. Because I was like, I hate social media. Like, I hate doing stuff on my account. So I was like, this is perfect. So it's like the dog's account, and I'm like posting his life as he goes through life. Okay. And so it's all like vet stuff for people who have dogs who want to know, like, what do you do about earrings? Nice. What do you do about skin? But it's him talking, so I can just be out of it. Because I don't even think I'm following this account. Right now, I'm not very quick on this. I'm not very quick. I have like 4 posts, but right now I'm going through like, it's like kind of educational, and it's about like, what do you do through the dog? And it's basically like, every week of a dog's life, like what you should be training, or what's normal, what's not normal, when you should deworm. Like, and so it's,
I love that.
I mean, we're slow because I'm like on, he's about 6 months old and I'm on like day 4, but it's eventually, but my point is all the labor videos are there and they're pretty cool to watch. So if anybody wants to see them,
Life by Jakey.
Life by Jakey. I think. Nice. You'll have to post it.
And then you also have a vet account too on social media, right?
Yeah. So I started a line of like holistic treats. So basically I try to use as little medicine as possible when it's not warranted, and trying to use more like, I really believe like diet is health, and a lot of our like inflammatory conditions and that is just lifestyle based in animals. So I wanted to put I have a line of treats that are just one ingredient, that are air dried, oven baked. So there's nothing in them, because I have a lot of dogs with allergies. And then we're coming out with a probiotic and an omega. And like the point is, there's all these tools that I'd like to use in clinic but don't exist. So like I either send people to a human health store and they try to get a human equivalent, but then I'm always worried that they're going to have an ingredient in there that's toxic or something. And so I'm like, I'm just going to create them. So I'm working with a company called Faubert, and I'm developing a whole line of stuff. And so, but they just took over the Dr. Kelly the Vet page. But I had the Dr. Kelly the Vet page, which was for years was just like random pictures of me at work, which now is going to go through. But now that the brand is growing, they're like, enough videos of your kids running after puppies. We need to have a little more brand cohesion. So that's all about like the products and the information, but more like that stuff will be on Life by Jakey. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Fun. Yeah.
That was easy.
Perfect.
Okay. Yes. Well, thank you, and have a great rest of the day.
All right. You too. Bye.
Okay. Bye.